In a hospital, someone who had just committed a mass murder was seen. The figure was holding 2 knives and wearing a pumpkin on their head as if celebrating Halloween. Meanwhile, in another place, a girl who had just returned from school was busy browsing through her social media accounts. The girl laughed at a post about a dog cosplay wearing a suit and a pig mask. While scrolling to the next post, the girl was startled by an account that had just followed her. The account was named Pumpkin Night. Curious, the girl decided to check the account before following back. As the account name suggested, the profile picture showed someone wearing a pumpkin on their head. A ribbon was tied at the top of the pumpkin. Once again, the girl burst into laughter, mocking the profile of Pumpkin Night for celebrating Halloween too early, which made her laugh so hard she clutched her stomach. Eventually, the girl followed back, thinking Pumpkin Night was a fun person. After following back, the girl received a message from Pumpkin Night. At first, the girl thought that Pumpkin Night was a man disguising himself as a woman. With mixed feelings, she opened the message. The girl's body froze instantly, cold sweat dripping down as she saw the contents of the message sent by Pumpkin Night. Pumpkin Night knew her name and said that it was time for her to die. The girl, named Asumi Nakatani, was utterly shocked. Pumpkin Night knew her name. Who was this person? And to make matters worse, Asumi was home alone. In the midst of her fear, Asumi's doorbell rang. This made her fear grow even more. The bell kept ringing continuously. Asumi checked her phone again, wondering if Pumpkin Night had really come for her. Asumi kept denying it. Due to the incessant doorbell ringing, Asumi had no choice but to gather her courage and leave her room, bringing her phone with her. However, she didn't open the door right away, even though the doorbell kept ringing. There was no one else to open the door as her parents hadn't returned from work. From the second floor, Asumi cautiously approached a window. She peeked out nervously and saw someone standing at her front door. The dim lighting made it difficult for Asumi to see the figure clearly, and part of the figure's body was hidden under the garage roof. The person stood right at the door, and a sliver of light coming through the glass on the door allowed Asumi to see something. The person was holding a cardboard box. Asumi finally sighed in relief, realizing it was just a delivery person. The courier had scared her half to death. Asumi hurriedly descended the stairs and, without thinking much, pushed the door open. It was the type of door that opened outward. As the door swung open, she saw a man holding a cardboard box with an extremely pale face. The man stood still before suddenly collapsing toward Asumi. Reflexively, Asumi tried to catch the man. She muttered in frustration, thinking someone was playing a prank on her. But then she felt something sticky on her hands and body. In shock, she let go of the man's body and saw that his back had been pierced through. Asumi screamed in terror as her clothes and hands were now drenched in blood. She noticed a figure wearing a pumpkin with a ribbon, holding a knife, and covered in blood. The figure raised the knife, preparing to stab her. Asumi shrieked and slammed the door shut just in time, causing the knife to pierce the door instead of her. She kept pulling the door and locked it, collapsing in front of it, breathing heavily and crying in fear. The figure was Pumpkin Night, and they had really come to kill her. Asumi panicked, unsure of what to do. She didn't want to die. Suddenly, she remembered she still had her phone and decided to call for help. However, she couldn't call her mom or dad, so she decided to dial the police. Just as she was about to call, an incoming call appeared on her phone. Seeing the contact photo, Asumi felt a glimmer of hope and answered the call without hesitation, begging for help. Before she could explain her situation, the boy on the other end, Kazuya, interrupted her. Kazuya told her that someone named Naoko had escaped. Asumi froze, staring at her phone. Kazuya reminded her of Naoko Kurino, a girl who had been their classmate in middle school. Naoko had been committed to a mental hospital, but that morning, she had killed all the nurses and patients before escaping. Asumi was stunned by the news. Before she realized it, Pumpkin Night had managed to enter her house through a window and now stood behind her. From the other end of the phone, Kazuya urged Asumi to check the news on TV to confirm that he wasn't lying. Naoko Kurino was the girl they had bullied back in middle school. Asumi was startled, and with trembling movements, she turned around to see Pumpkin Night standing behind her. A knife had already pierced through her back. At such close range, Asumi could see Pumpkin Night smiling widely at her while pushing the knife deeper into her back. Pumpkin Night yanked the knife out brutally, causing fresh blood to stain Asumi's clothes. Asumi screamed, clutching her wound. Like a professional, Pumpkin Night twirled the knife in their hand. Asumi, now fully aware of who she was dealing with, could only cry, her body trembling in fear. The phone was still connected, and Kazuya's voice could be heard calling out for her. Asumi tried to apologize to Naoko, but the response she received was unexpected. Pumpkin Knight, believed to be Naoko, swung the knife and slashed one of Asumi's eyes, causing it to pop out of its socket. Kazuya, hearing Asumi's screams, panicked and repeatedly asked what was happening. But Asumi didn't care anymore. She ran out of her house, her surroundings eerily quiet, with no one in sight in the residential area. Trembling in pain, Asumi kept moving, trying to escape Pumpkin Knight, who was still following her. Pumpkin Knight, holding Asumi's phone, continued to listen to Kazuya's frantic calls, smiling widely. Unbeknownst to her, Asumi had run into a busy highway filled with traffic. The sound of a blaring horn echoed loudly as a truck driver, shocked to see a girl suddenly appear in front of him, couldn't stop in time, resulting in a fatal collision. Asumi's body was crushed under the massive truck, and when it finally came to a halt, her body was wedged between the rear wheels. The truck driver immediately got out, horrified at the gruesome scene of Asumi's lifeless body. Pumpkin Knight watched the entire event unfold in silence, only snapping out of it when they heard Kazuya's voice still on the phone. Pumpkin Knight finally told Kazuya that Asumi was dead, and he was next. Kazuya's body went cold as the phone call ended. The next day, Asumi's funeral was held. All of her friends, classmates, and teachers gathered to mourn her tragic death. After the ceremony, some students started leaving. A boy stood nervously, leaning against a pillar, staring at his phone deep in thought. That boy was Kazuya. Soon after, he was approached by two of his friends, Saki and Arata. They knew that Kazuya was the last person to talk to Asumi, but he hadn't told the police yet. Just then, another boy interrupted them, stopping them from reporting to the police. If they did, the police would suspect them. Kazuya, Saki, and Arata turned to see a long-haired boy approaching them. His name was Naruto. The four of them hadn't met in a long time, and their reunion now felt like a painful reminder of their middle school days. The Hariyama Hospital, which became the site of mass murder, is now crowded with television stations. They are broadcasting live, interviewing, taking pictures, and so on. The security officers are overwhelmed trying to control the crowd in the hospital yard. According to circulating reports, more than 20 people have been killed. A suspect dubbed the patient has escaped, leaving the public in a state of panic. Meanwhile, far from the crowd, in a rundown place, a girl with an unformed face jumps up in joy. She is happy that everyone is talking about her on television, and maybe soon everyone will be terrified. The television screen is still on, and next to the girl lies a corpse with a hole in its head. Several lit candles stand on top of the body. The girl is none other than Naoko Kurino, the mastermind of the mass murder, or by another name, Pumpkin Knight. Elsewhere, at the location of Asumi's funeral ceremony, 4 students are seen discussing something. Saki, the only girl among them, says that Naoko Kurino is disgusting. Saki doesn't understand why Naoko would come to school looking so ridiculous. Acting like that only made Naoko an easy target for bullying. The question is, why now? Naoko has been locked up in a mental hospital for a long time. The 4 of them wonder if Pumpkin Knight is really Naoko. Saki asks if anyone has contacted Naoko. Maybe Pumpkin Knight isn't Naoko. Kazuya says they're not sure, but the voice on the phone last night sounded like a little child. Kazuya's 3 friends are utterly shocked upon hearing his confession. They become convinced that Pumpkin Knight is Naoko. The girl hasn't changed at all. Naoko always babbles about something, only caring about herself and not thinking about others. Naruto reaffirms that Naoko has Asumi's phone. Though not entirely sure, Kazuya says Naoko might still have it. They plan to use it to track Naoko's whereabouts through Asumi's phone's GPS. Naruto suggests they could catch Naoko before the police do. He then shares his idea of killing Naoko and making it look like a suicide. His 3 friends are shocked, shouting loudly enough to attract the attention of people leaving the funeral hall. Naruto immediately tells his friends to lower their voices, as someone might overhear their conversation. Sure enough, a bespectacled man, the principal, gives them a suspicious look. Saki nervously laughs and suddenly brings up a video game character who has died. Hirokawa, the principal, finally looks away, instructing his students to gather because Asumi's body will be cremated in an hour. Hirokawa grumbles, finding it hard to believe that the students are still fooling around while a classmate has died. The 4 students let out a sigh of relief, almost getting caught. They must be more careful. In a soft tone, Saki asks Naruto if they really plan to kill Naoko. According to Naruto, it's the only way. Even if the police catch Naoko, they'll think she's innocent because she's mentally ill. Once the public calms down, Naoko will escape again and come after them. They can't live in constant fear. Naruto is not ready for that. So, the only way to stop Pumpkin Knight's terror is to stop her together or alone. Naruto says he's not a coward and will do it even by himself. Initially shocked, Harada quickly agrees with Naruto's idea. Saki, standing nearby, is stunned. Harada, scared of Naoko's terror, feels there's nothing wrong with killing her since Naoko has always been their enemy. If Saki is too afraid to do it, then Naruto and Harada will handle it alone. Saki wants to protest, but they have no other option. Kazuya remains silent, watching his friends argue. This is just like before. Kazuya couldn't stop his friends from bullying Naoko. Naruto demands Kazuya's phone. Since Kazuya and Asumi often exchange emails, they can track Naoko through that. Kazuya hesitates, seemingly reluctant to hand over his phone. Frustrated, Harada yells at Kazuya to hand it over. Saki is also angry, feeling that Kazuya is moving too slowly while they are being targeted by Naoko. Kazuya finally sighs and turns on his phone. But as soon as he powers it on, a message from Pumpkin Knight pops up. The profile of a girl wearing a Halloween pumpkin on her head shocks Kazuya. Saki glances at Kazuya's phone and anxiously says that Pumpkin Knight also followed her yesterday. Without thinking, Saki had followed Pumpkin Knight back. Saki shows Pumpkin Knight's account to her three friends. It turns out that not only Saki and Kazuya were followed, Harada and Naruto were too. Tension fills the air. Pumpkin Knight followed them all at the same time. Even though Halloween is next month, Saki suspects that the Pumpkin Knight account is controlled by Naoko. Saki warns her friends that Naoko's madness was caused by her Halloween pumpkin. This is all happening because of what they did to Naoko in the past. Could this be retribution for their sins? They are all doomed. Overwhelmed with fear, Saki runs away, no longer able to bear it. Her three friends try to stop her, but Saki keeps running, tears streaming down her face. Naruto curses. They can't let Saki be alone because Naoko might be lurking nearby. Naruto thinks Saki could be a good bait to lure Naoko out. Grinning, Naruto suggests they follow Saki. Unfortunately, the three of them lose track of Saki. Amidst the crowded funeral hall, Kazuya, Naruto, and Harada frantically search for Saki. They split up, running around in a panic. Naruto instructs his friends to call him as soon as they find her. As for Saki, she is sitting on an emergency stairway, sobbing uncontrollably, her body trembling in fear. Saki wonders why things have turned out this way. She doesn't want to die. As Saki keeps muttering that she doesn't want to die, a voice appears behind her. The voice asks what Saki means by not wanting to die. Shocked, Saki turns around and sees the principal standing at the top of the stairs. Saki stands up, ready to leave, unwilling to answer Hirokawa's question. But Hirokawa suddenly mentions that he heard Saki was close to Asumi when they were in middle school. Hirokawa asks if Saki knows anything about Asumi's death. There is suspicion that Asumi's death wasn't an accident. Hirokawa suspects that Saki and her three friends know something about the odd circumstances surrounding Asumi's death. Just as Saki is about to deny it, she freezes in shock. Someone stabs the principal in the head with a knife. Saki is drenched in sweat, her eyes widening as she sees Pumpkin Knight standing behind Hirokawa. Pumpkin Knight smiles broadly from behind her pumpkin mask, having waited for Saki to arrive the whole time. Saki's legs felt as if they were rooted to the ground. She couldn't run. Even as she watched Pumpkin Knight pull a knife out of Hirokawa's head, she couldn't even scream. Pumpkin Knight was thoroughly enjoying the terrified expression on Saki's face, as if she were seeing a ghost. Hirokawa's blood spurted and splattered onto Saki's body. Hirokawa fell and died instantly. Pumpkin Knight twirled the knife in her hand. Saki tried to back away, but Hirokawa's blood made her slip and fall. Pumpkin Knight jumped, using Hirokawa's head as leverage. Pumpkin Knight unsheathed her knife and stabbed Saki in the nose. Saki, already paralyzed with fear, couldn't dodge, and the knife pierced through her face, only to be pulled out again by Pumpkin Knight. Saki clutched her face and screamed, rolling on the ground from the unbearable pain. She cried, her nose torn apart. Pumpkin Knight soothed Saki like calming a crying baby. But that was just the beginning. There would be plenty of time for Saki to cry. Pumpkin Knight sat on Saki's stomach, repeatedly striking her face mercilessly with the handle of the knife. In the hallway of the funeral building, Naruto looked around for Saki. He had no idea where she had run off to, but he was sure she couldn't have gone far. Naruto finally decided to call Saki. A few girls who noticed Naruto blushed. They were fans of his. Shortly after, a girl approached Naruto and asked if something was wrong. She guessed that Naruto was looking for someone and even called him darling. Naruto turned and grumbled, annoyed that she had come at such a bad time. He ignored the girl, whose name was Nomizu, and hurried off, saying there was nothing wrong. Unfortunately, Nomizu didn't believe him and kept following. Seeing Naruto's serious expression, Nomizu was sure something was up. She offered to help, but all she got was a firm rejection from Naruto. He told Nomizu to be quiet and leave him alone. Naruto didn't want to deal with Nomizu because he found her boring. He also made it clear that they were never in a relationship or had anything going on, just so Nomizu wouldn't get the wrong idea. Nomizu fell silent, then smirked and asked if the recently deceased girl, Asumi, was Naruto's junior high school friend. Naruto immediately stopped in his tracks, turning to face Nomizu. She smiled, pleased with his reaction. How did she know Asumi was his junior high classmate? With a triumphant look, Nomizu said that she knew all of Naruto's little secrets. Ever since he heard about Asumi's death, Naruto had been acting strange. Nomizu wanted to know if there was more to it than just that. Naruto's face turned furious. Seeing this, Nomizu asked him not to look so scary since she was on his side. Meanwhile, behind the wall, Kazuya was hiding, observing the interaction between Naruto and Nomizu. He hoped Naruto wouldn't see him. A moment later, the sound of an emergency alarm startled all the funeral guests. The students were confused, wondering what was going on, and they began rushing out of the funeral hall. The teachers tried to calm the chaos and directed the students out of the hall as they had practiced in school drills. People were pushing each other to get out, and Kazuya and his friends were forced to leave the building. Nomizu grabbed Naruto's arm, trying to lead him away. Naruto struggled, telling her to let go. From the upper floor, Pumpkin Knight watched the chaos unfold with ease. Still holding her knife, she walked while pushing a trolley with a large bag containing a human body. The bag was moving and making muffled sounds. Annoyed, Pumpkin Knight lifted her knife and struck the figure inside the bag with the handle, telling them to be quiet. Moments later, the figure fell silent. Pumpkin Knight continued pushing the trolley toward the funeral room where Asumi's coffin lay. The room was empty as everyone had fled. Pumpkin Knight looked at Asumi's photo and greeted her. She told Asumi not to worry anymore because her friend was about to meet the same fate. Outside the building, some teachers were shocked by reports from their colleagues. Someone had deliberately pressed the emergency alarm button, but no one had seen any fire. The teachers couldn't believe someone would pull such a prank during a mourning ceremony. Kazuya observed his surroundings. Naruto was still being pestered by Nozumi, who was clinging to him. Other students were frustrated by the false alarm. After scanning the area, Kazuya realized that Seki wasn't there. He suspected that Seki might have been the one to trigger the alarm. Shortly after, Arata came over and asked if Kazuya had seen Saki. Kazuya said he hadn't, and neither had Arata. Arata guessed that Saki might have gone home. Arata's attention was then drawn to the commotion caused by Nozumi. He asked Kazuya about the girl with Naruto. Kazuya didn't know much, except that Nozumi had been chasing after Naruto all day. He also knew that Naruto, Nozumi, and Asumi seemed to be connected somehow. Arata was surprised by Kazuya's statement. It seemed like Naruto's bad behavior had affected Asumi. Arata turned toward the entrance of the funeral hall and noticed that Asumi's coffin was being brought out to be taken to the cremation site. All the students lined up, clearing the way for the staff to load Asumi's coffin onto the vehicle. They were still crying, unable to come to terms with her passing. The vehicle carrying Asumi's body slowly left the grounds. Kazuya overheard two girls gossiping about the state of Asumi's body. Her coffin was sealed tightly. Her entire body had been crushed and mangled under the wheels of the truck. Asumi's face was also destroyed. The girls expressed their disgust. No one would see Asumi's face. She would be cremated for her own good. As Kazuya pondered their conversation, he glanced up and spotted a figure standing on the roof, waving. It was Pumpkin Knight. After waving, Pumpkin Knight turned and disappeared from Kazuya's view. Kazuya yelled, telling her to stop. But then Kazuya realized something. Pumpkin Knight had waved. Kazuya immediately turned his attention to the vehicle carrying Asumi's coffin, which had already left the funeral grounds. Kazuya suspected that Seki was inside. Kazuya immediately informed Arata and Naruto of this. Both of them were shocked. The alarm they heard earlier was just a distraction. Seki was going to be burned alive. Even though they had no proof of this, they had to chase after the car before Asumi was cremated. Unbeknownst to the three, Pumpkin Knight was watching their every move from the rooftop. The girl's body was covered in cuts, some stitched and others not. Kazuya hurriedly urged his friends to hail a taxi, certain they would arrive in time. Pumpkin Knight glared sharply at Kazuya, thinking that no matter how hard he tried, There would be no forgiveness for them. Just as the three boys reached the gate, the screams of people suddenly stopped them in their tracks. They turned in unison and were horrified to see Hirokawa's body hanging from the rooftop. His naked body was riddled with stab wounds from various sharp objects like scissors, knives, screwdrivers, and box cutters. His tongue hung out, his stomach was sliced open. It was gruesome. The crowd of students gathered around became nauseated at the sight of the body. Arata and Naruto couldn't look away, recognizing who it was. But they had no time to waste. Kazuya, enraged, started running again. Naoko was targeting all of them, and they needed to hurry to save Saki. Arata and Naruto had no other choice, and despite their frustration, followed Kazuya. Fortunately, when they reached the main road, a taxi passed by, and they quickly hailed it. The three high school students got in, knowing they needed to rush to the crematorium. However, the taxi driver hesitated, noticing their school uniforms, and asked if they were high school students, worried he might be dragging truants. Naruto immediately put on a sad expression, explaining that the person who had just passed away was the girl he loved deeply. He hadn't had the chance to tell her, and now he wanted to say goodbye before she turned to ashes. The driver, moved by the tragic love story, felt sympathy. Naruto's friends, on the other hand, couldn't believe Naruto secretly had feelings for Asumi. Without further hesitation, the driver hit the gas and told everyone to hold on tight as he sped off. Curiosity getting the better of him, Kazuya asked Naruto if he truly loved Asumi. Irritated, Naruto called Kazuya an idiot and clarified that he was only pretending to avoid more questions from the driver. Kazuya chuckled. The car sped along, and luckily the roads were clear that day, with only a few vehicles in sight. The speed kept increasing, and Kazuya, Arata, and Naruto resigned themselves to the possibility that the driver might kill them before Naoko even got the chance. In the midst of the tension, Kazuya glanced out the window and saw Pumpkin Knight right in front of them. Pumpkin Knight, Kazuya, and Arata locked eyes. Arata and Kazuya were shocked, not knowing where the girl had gotten the motorcycle. A metal pipe was even strapped to Pumpkin Knight's back. She smirked, lifted the pipe, accelerated the motorcycle, and struck the car's windshield, cracking it. The driver instinctively swerved the car and slammed on the brakes with all his might. Unfortunately, because of the car's high speed, the crash was unavoidable, and they collided with a guardrail, leaving the front of the car wrecked. The metal guardrail even pierced into the vehicle. Pumpkin Knight paused briefly to observe the scene. Inside the car, Kazuya, still conscious, groaned in pain. Blood dripped from his head, which had slammed against the front seat. Holding his head in agony, Kazuya was horrified to see that the driver had been impaled by the guardrail, which had gone through the windshield, killing him instantly. Kazuya let out a stifled scream. Outside the window, he saw Pumpkin Knight still watching them from atop her motorcycle. Their eyes met. Kazuya scrambled out of the car, but Pumpkin Knight revved the engine and sped off. She seemed in a hurry, not caring about Kazuya's presence. Didn't she target all of them from the beginning? So why was she leaving them alone now? Confused, Kazuya watched her disappear into the distance before collapsing. Before losing consciousness, he muttered an apology to Saki for not being able to save her. Meanwhile, Saki, slowly regaining consciousness, opened her eyes. She was shocked to find herself in a dim, stuffy space with limited visibility. But Saki couldn't speak or move her body as it was bound tightly with cloth. She wondered what was happening, feeling that she was in some sort of container being carried by people. Kazuya's guess was right. Saki was indeed inside Asumi's coffin. Saki realized her body was restrained and something was underneath her. She was lying on top of someone. Glancing as much as she could, Saki saw the lips of the person beneath her. Beneath those lips was a mole. Saki remembered that the person with a mole under their lips was Asumi. If that is truly Asumi's body, then it means Saki is inside the coffin. Saki's tears flowed again. She still didn't want to die, but how could she escape from this place? She couldn't even open her mouth. Not far from the cremation site, Pumpkin Knight sat leisurely on a motorcycle, recording the cremation scene. She was waiting for something. A little more and something exciting would happen. Pumpkin Knight bid farewell to Asumi and Saki, who would soon be going to heaven. Asumi's coffin was pushed towards the cremation furnace, and the grieving family was still deeply affected by the girl's departure. Saki, trapped inside the coffin, was in panic. She was about to be cremated but couldn't do anything. Saki heard the cremation furnace door open. She was terrified and could only cry silently. The girl wasn't ready to die yet. Everyone paid their last respects to Asumi before placing her in the furnace. Inside the coffin, Saki could feel the coffin being pushed into the furnace. She thrashed around, begging the people outside to stop. Unfortunately, the girl could only scream in her mind. The furnace door was closed, and the cremation fire was ignited. The fire quickly consumed the coffin and the body inside it. People continued to send their prayers for Asumi. Black smoke emerged from the cremation chimney. This made Pumpkin Night giddy. She was thrilled and continued recording the cremation site. One more person had been caught and was now being roasted alive. While celebrating her happiness, a police car stopped next to Pumpkin Night. Two female officers got out and approached the girl with a Halloween pumpkin on her head. The senior officer approached without suspicion, thinking Pumpkin Night was just a high school girl out for a stroll and skipping school. The senior officer asked what Pumpkin Night was doing there and whose motorcycle she was riding. The senior officer held Pumpkin Night's pumpkin head, saying it was too early for Halloween, and asked the girl to remove the pumpkin so she could see her face. However, what she found was beyond expectation. Pumpkin Night stabbed the officer's throat with a knife, piercing through to the top of her head. It was unclear where the girl had hidden the knife. The senior officer died instantly. Pumpkin Night pulled out her knife. The other officer was frozen, but soon realized danger was looming. The officer quickly fled back to her car. However, Pumpkin Night did not let her escape. Pumpkin Night removed a metal pipe still hanging on her back and threw it at the fleeing officer. The pipe pierced the officer's head, killing her instantly without resistance. After killing the two officers, Pumpkin Night resumed recording the cremation scene as if nothing had happened. The two officers' bodies were left lying on the street. One of the officers was the head of the road guards. Pumpkin Night planned to record him later for uploading to YouTube. In the cremation furnace, the fire continued to burn the coffin. Eventually, the cloth binding and covering Saki's mouth burned away, freeing the girl. Even while burning, Saki tried to kick the furnace door and scream. Everyone who heard it was shocked and stared at the door, which kept making noise. After confirming that the sound was indeed coming from inside the furnace and realizing someone was still alive inside, they rushed to extinguish the fire and open the door. The funeral staff became frantic, and eventually the fire was put out. Smoke billowed as the furnace door was opened. The platform used for placing the coffin was pulled outside. The body was indeed burned beyond recognition, and now everyone saw something terrifying. Even though it was half burned, the family knew that the face was not Asumi's. They saw two bodies intertwined, with Asumi's body beneath the other. They stared in horror at Saki, who was trying to seek help, wondering who the figure on top of Asumi's body was. Saki moaned. Her burned skin was stuck to Asumi's skin, and as she tried to move, her skin and flesh pulled against Asumi's body. Everyone couldn't bear to look at the scene, vomiting and paling. Saki tried to reach out to someone. Eventually, she managed to say a plea for help. In the hospital, Kazuya, with a bandaged head, sat alone in a waiting chair. He was busy scrolling through his phone and reading news about a tragic murder, including cases involving Asumi, Hirakawa, and two police officers. Naoko had gone too far. She would kill anyone who obstructed her path. Soon after, Naruto and Rada approached Kazuya. Naruto said that Naoko's actions were driven by fear. The girl didn't care who died. Her goal was to scare Kazuya and his friends until they submitted to Naoko. Or perhaps Naoko was just a person who enjoyed killing. Kazuya bowed his head, unable to refute Naruto's words. Kazuya then changed the subject, asking about Arata and Naruto's condition. Naruto had a cut from a piece of glass, injuring only one hand, which required a brace. Arata only had minor scratches. None of them had severe injuries from the accident. The good news was that Saki was also being treated at that hospital and was now in the ICU. Doctors and nurses were working hard to keep her alive after she nearly burned to death. Kazuya, Arata, and Naruto were grateful that Saki was still alive, though her condition was far from good. It was a miracle. In the ICU, the doctor provided extra care. Kazuya expressed his intention to Arata and Naruto to end all that had happened. Everything had gone beyond their control. It would be best if they informed the police about what they knew. The police needed to know that the bullying they had done during middle school was the cause of all these murders. Kazuya couldn't bear to see more people died because they continued to hide it from the police. So now let the police handle it. Arata and Naruto exchanged glances and then took a deep breath. They both eventually agreed with Kazuya's suggestion to report it to the police. In the ICU, the electrocardiograph machine beeped. The waveform on the machine gradually became a straight line. The nurse immediately informed the doctor. The doctor called out to Saki. Saki's eyes were wide open, showing extreme fear. However, the doctor did not know what was happening to Saki and assumed that her wide eyes were a response to the call. The doctor tried to reassure Saki, saying that he would help her and asking Saki to hang on. The electrocardiograph machine beeped loudly again. Saki's heartbeat was unstable, and she was in shock. The doctor and nurses tried to calm Saki, thinking she was still traumatized by the tragic event. However, all their assumptions were wrong. Saki was actually seeing Pumpkin Knight emerging from the vent. Saki became more frantic, and the doctor and nurses struggled to hold her down. Pumpkin Knight grinned, showing the knife in her hand. In a dining restaurant, 2 men and 2 women were enjoying their dinner. They had reserved a private dining room for themselves. However, they weren't just enjoying the food, they were also bullying one of the men. Another man put his arm around the bespectacled man next to him and told the 2 women in front of him that the bespectacled man was utterly useless. The bespectacled man being bullied was named Taniguchi. No matter what he did, Taniguchi was known for being incredibly foolish. Taniguchi had been subjected to bullying since he was a child. The 2 women listening to this smiled, enjoying the sight of someone being tormented. The man bullying Taniguchi patted Taniguchi's head. Since his youth, Taniguchi had been a pathetic dog who couldn't learn new tricks, so he never achieved any victories. Taniguchi was insecure, unremarkable, and lacked life experience. The bully's company was full of people like Taniguchi. The bully ordered Taniguchi to say, "Life is enjoyable." But Taniguchi remained silent, which only fueled the bully's anger. The bully punched Taniguchi's face repeatedly. The 2 women watching had no intention of intervening, they just laughed. Taniguchi didn't resist, he was used to such treatment. A moment later, Taniguchi suddenly stood up, surprising everyone as they thought he was going to fight back. Instead, he asked for permission to go to the restroom. Taniguchi's sudden departure left the bully feeling uneasy. However, he quickly pulled out his phone and showed something to the 2 women in front of him. A few days earlier, the bully had seen Taniguchi reading a comic on his phone that seemed real. The comic depicted a masked demon girl running around killing people. The bully showed a horrifying image to the 2 women, making them nauseous and lose their appetite. The comic's content was about tragic murders and blood everywhere, which was extremely disgusting. The bully was convinced that with Taniguchi reading such things, sooner or later, Taniguchi would become a criminal. When Taniguchi finally returned, the bully immediately ordered him to sit back down next to him as he intended to teach Taniguchi a lesson. But what he got instead was a knife stab right in his chest. Behind him was a figure wearing a Halloween pumpkin mask. The 2 women witnessing the scene let out muffled screams. Saki continued to wriggle, tears streaming down her face. The doctor and other nurses were still holding Saki, who was considered to be in severe shock. The doctor ordered one of the nurses to get a sedative. As the nurse turned to retrieve the syringe, she came face to face with Pumpkin Knight. Without hesitation, Pumpkin Knight immediately drove the knife she carried into the nurse's face. The doctor and other nurses turned around, their eyes wide with shock as they saw their colleague's head impaled by the knife. The nurse fell and died instantly. The female nurses who witnessed their colleague's body screamed, wondering what was happening. They also wondered where the knife had come from. Meanwhile, Saki, who was on a respirator, was unable to move. Pumpkin Knight hummed and approached the surgical tools, choosing among them. Pumpkin Knight struggled, unsure whether to pick scissors or a scalpel. However, her attention was drawn to a cutting tool that could spin. The girl picked up the tool, turned it on, and charged at the doctor. The doctor tried to fend off the attack with one hand, causing the fast-spinning machine to slice into his hand. Pumpkin Knight did not release the tool and continued pressing it, severing the doctor's hand. Saki wanted to scream, but her mouth was covered by the respirator, and she didn't have the strength to do so. The doctor, with his hand severed, fell sitting beside the bed. Pumpkin Knight lifted the tool and smashed it into the doctor's face. In an instant, Pumpkin Knight had killed 2 people. Now only 2 nurses remained, frozen in shock at the sight of their murdered colleagues. They only snapped out of it when Pumpkin Knight looked at them. The 2 nurses quickly retreated and fled. Pumpkin Knight was not going to let them escape. She approached the surgical table again, grabbed several scalpels and scissors, and threw them at the 2 fleeing nurses heading for the exit. Fleeing would only ruin Pumpkin Knight's fun. She couldn't let her prey get away. The scissors and scalpels hit the backs of the 2 nurses, making them grimace, even though they were right by the door. With growing fear, they looked back as Pumpkin Knight approached them with more surgical equipment. Pumpkin Knight was very excited. It was time to play surgeon. Brutally, Pumpkin Knight thrust the knife in her hand towards the 2 nurses. Saki, who had been watching the scene, called out to Pumpkin Knight, begging her to stop killing the 2 nurses. Hearing Saki's voice, Naoko immediately stopped her actions and turned her attention to Saki, who was still lying on the bed. Naoko asked if Saki was joking, questioning how Saki could ask a murderer to stop killing when she was next in line. Naoko's words terrified Saki, causing her tears to flow even more. Naoko aha. Pumpkin Knight glanced at the floor, her mind filled with a good idea. Naoko picked up the tool she used to kill the doctor, pulled back, and cut the wire connected to it. Naoko said that she really liked drama and would try it out, which might be a bit surprising. The cut ends of the wire sizzled. With just a glance, Saki knew it was high voltage. Naoko slowly approached, and Saki grew increasingly frantic. Without hesitation, Naoko electrocuted Saki. Saki convulsed and screamed as loudly as she could. Naoko's actions caused the hospital lights to go out. Within a minute, the lights came back on. People in the hospital were bewildered by the event. Harada watched the flickering hospital lights, wondering why there was a power outage. It seemed odd, but he hoped Saki's surgery would proceed smoothly. Arata, Naruto, and Kazuya stared at the still-closed ICU room. While watching, the three heard the sound of someone kicking the door. The sound was repeated several times. They paused, trying to process what was happening. Kazuya realized something had happened in the ICU room and immediately ran. Arata and Naruto tried to stop him, as the lights indicating that surgery was in progress were still on. But Kazuya ignored them and broke down the ICU door. Arata and Naruto followed closely behind. The three stared in shock at the sight of the nurses' bodies scattered everywhere. It was utterly incomprehensible. They wondered if Naoko had been there. Arata smelled something burning and suspected it was the cause of the power outage. Kazuya glanced at the bed where Seki lay with a face severely mutilated and covered in cuts. Initially, Kazuya thought Seki had died because her condition seemed beyond saving. However, after a moment, Seki's eyes opened and she groaned, calling out to Kazuya with a barely audible voice. Kazuya, Arata, and Naruto breathed a sigh of relief. Seki was still alive. They couldn't believe the girl had survived the ordeal that nearly took her life. Naruto and Arata quickly called for doctors to save Saki. Kazuya approached the bed, urging Saki to hang on. No one knew that a Halloween pumpkin was hidden under the bed. Saki, lying there, had a wide smile. Whether it was a genuine smile or just the result of her torn lips exposing all her teeth was unclear. Now Seki has been moved to another room. Her body is wrapped in bandages, resembling a mummy. Her eyes are closed, and a respirator is attached to her nose. Kazuya, Arata, and Naruto look at their friend with concern. Outside the hospital building, they hear a detective scolding his subordinates. The detective is instructing his team to turn away people trying to enter the hospital, including media wanting to cover the incident. Kazuya, standing by the window, turns around and sees the scene in the hospital courtyard filled with police officers. It turns out Kazuya knows the detective. The detective, noticing someone watching him, turns his face and looks directly at Kazuya. Kazuya, feeling frightened, quickly steps back and closes the curtain. Seki's parents have not arrived yet, which means they need to keep watch over her. Seki's parents are overseas and the police have contacted them, saying they will return tomorrow night. Kazuya is relieved that Seki is still alive, despite the doctors and all the nurses being killed. Arata thinks Naoko did not kill Saki because she knew they were coming. Naruto interjects, correcting Arata. Naoko actually spared Saki for a reason. Naoko had no intention of killing them. Arata and Kazuya don't understand Naruto's words. Why would Naoko not want them dead? Didn't the girl kill Asumi yesterday? Naruto reminds his friends that Asumi died in an accident. She ran into the street and was hit by a truck. Naoko might not have intended such a thing. Like Hirakawa, the two policewomen, and the hospital staff, Naruto believes Naoko does not want them to die instantly like that. Naoko wants them alive to torment and play with them. Arata looks at Saki. Even though Naoko doesn't want them dead, she has already made Saki burn alive. Naruto warns his friends about their original plan not to tell the police anything. They will save Saki in their own way. Arata is shocked by his friend's words. Naruto, confidently smiling, believes Naoko will come after them again. They need to capture and kill her. Naruto is sure Naoko won't expect them to retaliate. If they strike first, Naruto is confident they can do it. Arata, though hesitant, eventually agrees with Naruto's idea. Their decision is made. They will kill the girl. Kazuya, listening to his friend's conversation, remains silent, wondering why they are not aware and are still planning to kill Naoko. Saki, who has opened her eyes, sees her three friends. No one knows she has regained consciousness. Saiki sees Arata and Naruto making plans, while Kazuya remains silent with a sad face. Saiki wishes she could tell Kazuya not to be too sad because it will all end, but she can only say it in her heart. In the police station, the detective looks extremely angry while staring at the Halloween pumpkin on the table. He asks his colleague again if they are sure the item was under the table. The pumpkin looks homemade. In addition, they also found school uniforms, women's underwear, and shoes. The detective is furious. What kind of lunatic plans a Halloween party in an operating room? It's absurd. The detective's colleague apologizes, saying he doesn't know anything. The items were found in the ICU during their investigation. The detective feels that the series of murders that occurred in the past few days are connected. The high school girl's accident, the mutilated teacher at the mortuary building, the murdered policewoman in front of the crematorium, the case of the high school student's cremation, the doctor killed in the operating room, and now the pumpkin head. The perpetrator must be nearby. The detective then asks his colleague if he has a list of the victim's friends at the hospital. The colleague immediately provides it. The detective reads it carefully and sees the photos of Naruto and Arata, who are second-year students at Hosonomiya. Just one look and the detective knows that those two are not easy to admit. The detective flips to the next page and sees a photo of Kazuya. He immediately lights up. The detective feels that Kazuya is the easiest to make confess. At the hospital, a female morgue officer reveals a discrepancy. There is one more body in the morgue. Counting again, there are 8 doctors and nurses who were killed, but there are 9 bodies in the morgue. The officer's colleague suggests that a doctor from another hospital might have come to assist with the operation. However, the morgue officer disagrees. Unfortunately, her colleague dismisses it and tells her to include the extra doctor in the incident. It doesn't make a difference. The colleague goes to check another hospital. The morgue officer stops him, saying that the 9th body seems to have been electrocuted. It is clear that the body was burned. Meanwhile, in the room where Saiki is being treated, Kazuya appears to be deep in thought. Saiki continues to watch him. For Saki, sitting like this brings back memories. It turns out the person being treated is not Saki, but Naoko. After Naoko eliminated Saki, she scratched her own body to look like Saki. Naoko realizes she overdid it with the self-inflicted injuries, but she's used to it now. Kazuya, exhausted from everything he has been through, inadvertently falls asleep. His face rests on the edge of the bed. Seeing Kazuya asleep, while Arata and Naruto are not there, Naoko slowly gets up. She removes the respirator and carefully reaches for Kazuya. Naoko approached Kazuya and was about to grip his neck. As she got closer, Naoko heard him mumbling her name. She immediately froze and halted her action, wondering what Kazuya was dreaming about to repeatedly say her name. In his dream, Kazuya was reliving a past event. He was running searching for Naoko, calling her name along the corridor. Kazuya appeared very cheerful until he finally found Naoko in a room, sitting on a table. She was sitting with her knees hugged, looking gloomy. Naoko, the beautiful girl with a ribbon on her head, turned towards Kazuya. He approached her, having suspected that Naoko would be there. Everyone in their class was surprised when Naoko suddenly ran out of the classroom, so Kazuya decided to find her. He knew where Naoko was hiding. She was heading to the science lab, her favorite place. However, Kazuya did not like that place because it looked disgusting with its animal fermentation and preservation. Moments later, Kazuya was startled when Naoko asked if all of this was a trap. Despite the trap, Naoko would remain the queen. Kazuya looked at Naoko with concern. He tried to encourage her, telling her to be more confident. Only the prettiest girl in class is chosen to be Halloween, and Naoko was selected because of her cute face. Naoko exhaled, realizing that she was indeed cute. Hearing Naoko speak with such confidence made Kazuya fidget. However, Naoko again questioned whether she was chosen because she was cute and beautiful. Kazuya enthusiastically confirmed it, as the voting results showed that. Naoko smiled brightly, and Kazuya was happy to see her no longer looking gloomy. Naoko jumped off the table, bouncing around and saying that she wanted to be the Halloween queen forever. Kazuya observed the girl's behavior. Despite her strange and overly active antics, Naoko was a different kind of girl. Her way of speaking was also quite odd. Maybe if Naoko acted a bit more normal, her beauty would increase. It was Naoko's weird and different behavior that made her an easy target for bullying. Kazuya, who had been watching Naoko, was startled when she suddenly stopped bouncing and stared at him. Naoko ran towards Kazuya, examined his face up close, and then kissed his lips. Kazuya was motionless, surprised that Naoko had the courage to do that. His face turned red. Naoko released the kiss and laughed again. She giggled and resumed her cheerful bouncing. Naoko said that the kiss was her way of thanking Kazuya. Once again, Kazuya remained still, watching Naoko dance around. Because Naoko often did strange things, she was hated by everyone. But Kazuya did not care about others' views of Naoko. Then, an unexpected event occurred. The very cheerful Naoko started cursing at Kazuya, calling him a liar. Naoko covered her burned face, and everyone around her laughed, with no one helping. Naruto, Arata, Asumi, and Seiki laughed the loudest. Kazuya could only look guilty, with tears streaming down his face as he looked at Naoko's destroyed face. Naoko was furious, saying that Kazuya had deceived her. She cursed him out. Kazuya woke up gasping for breath. Sweat drenched his body. He stood up, wiping his sweat while sighing in relief, realizing it was just a dream. Kazuya glanced at the sleeping Naoko, still unaware it was her. He covered his face, feeling frustrated about why everything turned out this way. If only he had stopped that event, maybe everything would have been fine. Naoko watched Kazuya, unsure why she didn't end up killing him. Kazuya decided to leave the room and walk down the hospital corridor. He sighed repeatedly, his thoughts on Naoko, his guilt growing. Kazuya hoped Naoko would come to see him. He wanted to apologize directly to her. He wanted to calm Naoko's anger and resolve everything. Kazuya's steps suddenly halted when he saw the Pumpkin Knight figure standing in front of him. The girl in the Halloween pumpkin costume stood upright, with no scratches on her body. Kazuya was utterly shocked and called out Naoko's name. However, Pumpkin Knight did nothing. She turned around and fled. Without hesitation, Kazuya immediately chased after the girl. Kazuya kept shouting at Pumpkin Knight to stop, but there was no response at all. Pumpkin Knight increased her pace. As soon as Kazuya reached a corner, he stopped in his tracks, stunned to see the detective there with Pumpkin Knight standing beside him. The detective greeted Kazuya with a victorious smile. The detective immediately presented his ID, revealing his name as Matsu, and that he was from the Hashimiya Investigation Department. Matsu also confirmed that the person in front of him was Kazuya Makino. Still in shock, Kazuya remembered that Matsu was the detective who had been glaring at him the day before. Kazuya wondered why Matsu knew his name and how the detective was with Pumpkin Knight. Pumpkin Knight, standing next to Matsu, asked if she could remove the Halloween pumpkin. After receiving permission from Matsu, Pumpkin Knight took off the pumpkin. Once again, Kazuya was shocked to find that the person behind the pumpkin was not Naoko, but another girl. Matsu smirked at Kazuya's expression. He praised his colleague, saying that the girl's physique was very suitable for playing Pumpkin Knight. Matsu patted the girl on the head. It turned out that the girl was a police officer, though she was a bit short. Matsu also mentioned that the girl was not Naoko Kurino. Matsu wanted to hear the full story and invited Kazuya somewhere. Kazuya suspected that this had all been planned. The detective was very sharp. As he was hesitating, a noisy commotion could be heard from the corridor leading to Saki's room. A woman with a very flashy appearance was shouting, scolding a man who looked breathless carrying 2 bags. The woman told the man to hurry up, but he couldn't run because he was carrying company data. The woman was angry, saying she had told him to send it by courier, but he refused for fear of losing the company's data. The woman asked if work was more important than their child. They were Saki's parents. Saki's father defended himself, saying at least he wasn't the one choosing to watch a musical drama before going home. Saki's mother wasn't backing down, saying she had already bought the tickets upon hearing about Saki, so she couldn't waste them. A nurse they passed scolded them for running and causing a commotion in the hospital. However, Saki's mother, who was irate and overflowing with emotion, shouted at the nurse. The husband called his wife and pointed to Saki's room. Saki's mother quickly pushed the door open, and the couple greeted with smiles. But who would have thought they would find their child wrapped in bandages? Both of them were very panicked and approached Saki's bed. Inside, there was also a doctor and a nurse who had just checked Saki's condition. Saki's mother asked what had happened to their child. The doctor asked if they were Saki's parents. After confirming that they were indeed Saki's parents, the doctor explained that Saki had almost been cremated and was attacked during surgery. However, Saki's parents seemed indifferent to the doctor's explanation and were only focused on their child. Naoko snorted. The parents were so noisy and disturbing her peace. Saki's parents asked why such things happened to their child, and they were very emotional. Naoko, observing them, planned to destroy Saki's parents as well, just as she had destroyed Saki. Elsewhere, the detective now sitting with Kazuya showed several photos of victims from the murders committed by Naoko Kurino. 4 days ago, Naoko had killed all the doctors and staff at the hospital where she was treated and then escaped. That same night, on the same day Naoko fled, Asumi was killed in a mysterious accident. Then a courier who delivered a package to Asumi's home went missing, and shortly after, the courier's body was found in a ditch with a hole in his head. Kazuya's face turned pale as he looked at the photos lined up in front of him. But the detective had more surprises. The girl disguised as Pumpkin Knight stopped Matsui, asking about the investigation of the operating room. Matsui smiled, saying he was looking for information and had obtained the documents. Matsui produced more photos, including Hirokawa hanging at a funeral home, 2 female police officers killed near the crematorium, and also a taxi driver who died with Kazuya and his friends as passengers. The girl disguised as Pumpkin Knight couldn't hold back her nausea and wanted to vomit upon seeing these photos. As if that wasn't enough, Matsui produced even more photos. Meanwhile, in Saki's room, there was a commotion. Saki's mother yelled in frustration, saying the hospital felt stuffy, she couldn't stand it anymore, and wanted to transfer her child to a more luxurious hospital. Saki's mother instructed her husband to use his connections to easily transfer their child. She couldn't stand seeing her beloved child treated in what she considered a dirty hospital. Saki's father frantically searched for contacts on his phone. Saki's mother looked back at her child, urging Saki to hold on because they would be moving soon. Naoko, who was already very emotional, finally opened her eyes upon hearing the loud noise. Saki's mother clearly saw her and was overjoyed to see her child awake. Saki's father, having finished the call, was also equally pleased to see Saki's condition. Saki's mother tried to talk to her child, but the response she received was completely unexpected. Naoko grumbled, cursing Saki's mother, and raised her hand holding a syringe. It was unclear where the girl had obtained the syringe. Naoko quickly jabbed the syringe into Saki's mother's mouth. Back with Kazuya and the detective now showed several photos of a doctor and nurse who had recently been killed while performing surgery on Saki. The number of murders in the past 4 days had risen, and Matsui was convinced that Kazuya knew more about what caused all this. However, Kazuya's gaze was fixed on one of the 9th victims that he recognized very well. The figure in the photo was Saki. Matsui and his colleague were shocked, not expecting that one of the bodies was Saki. Meanwhile, in Saki's room, the syringe used by Naoko to attack Saki's mother had pierced the woman's tongue. The husband was in shock. Naoko grinned. Finally, the noisy woman was quiet. Kazuya realized that Naoko had swapped places with Saki and sensed danger approaching Saki's parents.
Continuing the previous story, it looks like Matsui chased after Kazuya, who suddenly started running, shocked by Kazuya's words that Naoko had switched places with Saki. Matsui was confused, watching Kazuya hurriedly leave the room. Behind them, the girl disguised as Pumpkin Knight also chased after them. The hospital corridor immediately became chaotic with the 3 of them in a chase. Matsui kept pressing Kazuya to explain what was happening. Kazuya gritted his teeth, hoping that what he feared would not come true. He was deeply worried about the fate of Saki's parents. Meanwhile, in the room where the fake Saki was being treated, Saki's mother's tongue was bleeding profusely. Saki's father was in a panic, filled with worry and fear. Naoko stood on the bed, grinning. Saki's mother kept screaming with a syringe still stuck in her tongue, and soon she collapsed. Saki's father, confused, stared at his daughter, wondering why she had become like that. But instead of an answer, he was met with 5 syringes stabbed into his face. He groaned in pain, clutching his face. Naoko became furious. Even Saki's own parents didn't recognize their daughter. What kind of parents were they? Saki's behavior was exactly like her parents, and that's probably why Saki turned out to be a bad person. A bad generation. Naoko truly hated people like them. Hearing Naoko's words made Saki's mother recall someone her daughter had often talked about. She remembered her daughter mentioning a strange person in her class, someone who was referred to as a monster. People like Naoko deserved punishment. Saki's father tried to stop his wife before she said anything worse. Saki's mother also remembered that Naoko's face had been burned, and she said Naoko deserved it. She called Naoko a monster. In Saki's mother's opinion, Naoko had returned to seek revenge, which was why she had escaped from the hospital. Naoko was truly a monster. Saki's father didn't know what to do. His wife's words had only made Naoko angrier by continuously calling her a monster. Eventually, in her rage, Naoko grabbed 6 syringes and stabbed them into Saki's mother's eyes. Saki's mother couldn't dodge as Naoko suddenly leapt towards her. Brutally, Naoko stabbed the syringes into her eyes until they broke. Naoko didn't care about Saki's mother's screams. Meanwhile, in the hospital corridor, Kazuya explained everything he knew about Naoko to Matsui and his partner. Naoko's face had been burned in what Kazuya said was an accident. Every year, their school held a Halloween party where everyone spent time making their own costumes. The highlight of the event was that all the prettiest girls in class participated, and the one chosen would be crowned Pumpkin Queen. The female officer disguised as Pumpkin Knight glanced at the pumpkin mask in her hand. The three of them were currently in an elevator heading to the floor where Saki was being treated. Kazuya continued his story, explaining that Naoko had been chosen as the best girl, but it had been a trap. Someone had placed fireworks inside her pumpkin. Matsui and his partner were shocked to hear this. Taking a deep breath, Kazuya explained that Naoko had always been a strange person and was often bullied. As a result, people intentionally set her up to humiliate her in front of the entire school. But when Naoko put on her pumpkin mask, the fireworks inside the pumpkin exploded, setting her hairspray on fire along with the pumpkin. Naoko thrashed around and no one knew what was really happening. The fire inside the pumpkin couldn't be seen from outside, so everyone just laughed as Naoko rolled around on stage. No one helped her. Kazuya began crying as he recalled the events of the past. He had been powerless at the time. Back in the room where Saki was being treated, Naoko was still brutally stabbing the broken syringes into Saki's mother's face. Saki's father, terrified, slowly backed away, accidentally bumping into a chair. Without thinking, he grabbed the chair and swung it at Naoko. However, Naoko's instincts were quick and she dodged. The blow landed squarely on his wife's already disfigured face. Saki's father was shocked to see his attack miss. Before he could recover, Naoko appeared behind him and grabbed his hair. She was done playing. With a piece of the broken syringe in her hand, Naoko swiftly slit Saki's father's throat. Inside the elevator, Matsui held his head. He was feeling dizzy. The cases he encountered were never normal. Naoko was out for revenge, but no matter what, they had to catch her. After all, the law is the law. Matsui was prepared to take down Naoko if it was necessary to apprehend her. Kazuya's eyes brightened, realizing that his decision to tell the detective about Naoko was the right one. The elevator arrived at the floor where Saki was being treated, and Matsui ordered the two young officers with him to stay alert as Naoko could appear at any moment. However, what they found was completely unexpected. As soon as the elevator doors opened, a large crowd surged inside. They were pushing and shoving, panicked as if fleeing from something. Matsui, the undercover Pumpkin Knight officer, and Kazuya were pushed to the back of the elevator and squeezed in tightly. Amidst the chaos, Matsui accidentally caught sight of smoke billowing from the direction the crowd had come from. Curiously, everyone was heading toward the elevator. Seeing the commotion, Kazuya already suspected that Naoko was behind it. Kazuya stood still until he felt someone staring intensely at him. He turned, and in the corner of the elevator, Naoko stood wearing a jacket and hood, staring straight at him. Even though Kazuya had wanted to meet Naoko, he was still shocked to be so close to her. Naoko kept staring at Kazuya. Now it was time for Kazuya to recognize the girl. Kazuya and Naoko exchanged glances for quite a while. Matsui, noticing the smoke, immediately pushed through the crowd, asking people to make way. He also grabbed the back collar of his partner's shirt, knowing their top priority was to evacuate the patients. Fortunately, his partner was smaller, making it easier for them to slip through the crowd. However, Matsui realized something and glanced back to check on Kazuya. In the corner of the elevator, Matsui saw Kazuya speaking to someone. He couldn't clearly see the figure as Naoko was wearing a hood. Matsui watched Naoko for a long time until she slightly turned, and that's when Matsui realized it was Naoko. Matsui, who had already exited the elevator, yelled loudly, but unfortunately the elevator doors had already closed. Matsui cursed in frustration, feeling completely fooled. Amidst Matsui's frustration, a scream was heard. Matsui's attention shifted, and he no longer cared about Naoko in the elevator as he dashed towards the source of the scream. A woman was covering her face while the man with her looked pale and sweaty. Matsui asked them what had happened. The woman pointed towards a room, stammering as she explained that when she opened the door to evacuate a patient, she stumbled upon something shocking. Matsui and his partner rushed into the room the woman mentioned and were both horrified by the gruesome scene inside. In the elevator, Naoko said she knew Kazuya would be there. That's why she switched places with Saki, just so she could be with Kazuya, even if only for a short moment. Their meeting that day was merely a brief encounter. Kazuya was silent upon hearing Naoko's words. Meanwhile, in the room Naoko had just left, the bodies of Saki's parents were in a horrifying state. Matsui and his partner's faces turned pale. Saki's father's head was placed inside his stomach, and a flower was planted in his neck. Matsui's partner gagged at the revolting sight. In the elevator, Naoko stuck out her tongue at Kazuya and winked. She asked if Kazuya was afraid of her. Kazuya remained silent, confused by the fact that even though Naoko was so close, she didn't kill him. The elevator finally reached the hospital lobby. As the doors opened, everyone rushed out in panic. Kazuya and Naoko also stepped out of the elevator. Naoko walked ahead, bidding Kazuya goodbye. She warned him that he would be the last person she would kill. Naoko chuckled and then turned away, leaving Kazuya. This time, Kazuya didn't remain still. He stopped the girl from leaving. Kazuya asked why Naoko was killing people and pleaded with her to stop everything. Kazuya said that everything that happened back when they were in middle school was just an accident. It was all just a joke set up by others. Kazuya kept begging Naoko to forgive him, Naruto, and Arata. Naoko stopped in her tracks and asked if Kazuya really believed that the fireworks in her hairspray were what caused her burns. Hearing that question, Kazuya fell silent. Naoko turned back to face him, cursing in frustration and saying that things were not that simple. It wasn't the fireworks that exploded, and it wasn't the fireworks that burned her face. The pumpkin mask was made especially for Naoko. Kazuya was stunned, realizing that everything he thought he knew was wrong. Elsewhere, Matsui and his partner hurried down the stairs. Matsui kept wondering why Naoko sought revenge to this extent. Wasn't her face just slightly burned? Naoko was still a minor, so there had to be another reason. Matsui was sure of it. He kept moving, despite his partner calling out to him, struggling to keep up with the detective. Meanwhile, Kazuya, hearing Naoko's explanation, couldn't believe it. How could something like that have happened without him knowing? Everything Kazuya had heard was completely different from what Naoko had just told him. Kazuya shouted in frustration, asking why Naoko hadn't told anyone, including him. Naoko should not have kept it hidden. Naoko dismissed Kazuya's words, saying she had told people, even adults, but they didn't care. That's why she decided to take matters into our own hands. Naoko turned away and left Kazuya standing still. Kazuya no longer tried to stop her. Naoko walked with her head down, blending into the crowd. Kazuya kept watching her leave, but suddenly he was startled as Naoko turned around and blew him a kiss. Then she skipped away joyfully, humming as she exited the hospital. Kazuya frowned, a deep sadness etched on his face. He missed her. Moments later, Matsui arrived, immediately asking where Naoko was. Matsui and his partner were panting, sweat pouring down their faces. Kazuya turned but didn't answer Matsui's question. Frustrated, Matsui pressed Kazuya again to tell him where Naoko went. Kazuya glanced towards the exit and said Naoko wasn't there anymore, that she had gone far and couldn't be stopped. Matsui gritted his teeth, angry that he had come so close to catching Naoko. Meanwhile, on the highway, Naoko had already gotten on a motorcycle, whose it was unknown, and sped off to an unknown destination. At school, Kazuya met up with Naruto and Arata again. He explained how Naoko had disguised herself as Saki and how Saki's parents had been murdered. Saki had been killed in the operating room, and Naoko had switched places with her. Naruto and Arata became furious, realizing they had been in the same room as Naoko, having been completely played by her. Kazuya carefully watched his friends' reactions, wondering which of them was responsible for burning Naoko's face. Or perhaps Arata and Naruto had worked together. Naruto bit his thumbnail, frustrated that Naoko had overheard everything they had said earlier. Arata clenched his fists, regretting not realizing it was Naoko, as they could have caught her by now. Kazuya suspected that Naoko had disguised herself as Saki to uncover the mastermind behind the pumpkin mask prank. Naoko only wanted to find out who did it. Kazuya truly felt sorry for her. At the police station, Matsui was further investigating Naoko. He stared at a photo of a short-haired girl with a large bow on her head, wearing earrings. Matsui stared at the picture of Naoko for a while until his colleague came in, complimenting the photo. Naoko looked very beautiful, but her personality was undoubtedly strong. Naoko stood out in a crowd. The large bow and earrings made her noticeable, and with such an appearance, it wasn't surprising that she was bullied. Matsui pulled up another photo on his laptop. It was a picture of Naoko with a bruised face, and even her shoulder-length hair had been cut short like a boy's. It seemed Nayako had been severely bullied. The photo was from a school trip during their second year of middle school. Matsui's colleague gasped, shocked by Nayako's short haircut. Matsui commented that the haircut didn't suit the large bow Nayako often wore. The people who bullied Nayako were incredibly cruel. Matsui's face tightened with anger as he looked at the bruises on Nayako's face. She must have endured a lot during that time. Despite her hair being cut short, Nayako continued to wear the bow to school, never paying attention to her bullies. Seeing this attitude only provoked the bullies further, and the bullying escalated until Nayako's face was burned. Matsui had a gut feeling that Nayako's burned face wasn't an accident but was deliberately caused by someone. At school, Naruto scrolled through his phone, reading a news article about the murders that had been terrorizing the public. Naruto was visibly upset, still unable to catch Nayako. To make matters worse, he was currently dealing with a girl who only added to his frustration. That girl was none other than Namizu, the bespectacled girl who had been bothering him back at Asumi's funeral. The serial killings were connected to bullying, and it would be chaos if the public learned the truth behind the murders. The media would turn it into a hot topic, which is why Naruto was so worried. Naruto snapped at the girl, asking why Namizu kept cornering him. Why did she think he was connected to the serial killer? Naruto suspected Namizu was accusing him just to trap him, but unfortunately, Naruto wasn't someone who could easily be blackmailed. Frustrated, Naruto clicked his tongue and walked away from Namizu. However, Naruto froze when Namizu mentioned that she had the pumpkin mask. Adjusting her glasses, Namizu smiled, pleased with how she had baited Naruto. It seemed Naruto didn't realize that Namizu had gone to the same middle school as him. Namizu was a member of the student council and had been on the Halloween event committee. Her appearance back then was vastly different from now. She used to have her hair in pigtails and looked innocent, unlike her current flirtatious look. No wonder Naruto hadn't recognized her. Namizu recalled seeing Naruto sneak into the equipment room and tamper with the pumpkin mask with a malicious grin. She wasn't sure what he had been doing until the accident occurred, which caused Nayako's face to burn. Namizu had watched Naruto and his friends laugh and high five, enjoying Nayako's suffering on stage. Namizu knew everything. Naruto was the mastermind behind Nayako's killing spree. Back then, the Halloween committee had rushed to the stage when they saw smoke coming from the pumpkin mask, but it was too late. Nayako's face had already been burned. Standing on the stage, Namizu had seen the pumpkin mask lying discarded on the floor. She had picked it up and taken it home. Naruto's face turned pale, realizing that someone else knew about his crime. Namizu smirked, seeing Naruto's reaction just as she had hoped. Naruto stood frozen, not knowing what to do. Suddenly, Namizu approached and hugged him, causing Naruto to stumble back in shock. Namizu assured him not to worry. She wouldn't reveal his secret to anyone because she was on his side. Namizu promised to protect him with all her heart. Namizu straddled Naruto, who couldn't resist, fearing she would expose his secret if he tried to fight back. She gently stroked Naruto's face and explained that she had kept the pumpkin mask in a safe place. She wouldn't let anyone else have it. If someone else got hold of it, they would examine the fingerprints on the mask, and Naruto would be arrested. Namizu lifted her shirt, revealing her large chest, pressing it against Naruto. Without hesitation, she kissed him. Naruto stayed motionless, neither rejecting nor resisting her. His mind was in turmoil, struggling to believe that Namizu had seen everything and still kept the mask. He wondered what she was planning. Cursing inwardly, Naruto thought of Namizu as a conniving girl who had waited for an opportunity like this to trap him into submission. As Namizu kissed him, her hand reached to remove her lower garments. Naruto was utterly disgusted by her behavior. But before she could proceed, Namizu's chest was suddenly pierced by a metal hook resembling a fishing hook. The sharp hook was yanked, leaving Namizu dangling by her chest. Naruto's eyes widened in shock at the sight. Namizu screamed in pain. Behind her stood Pumpkin Knight, Nayako, holding the wire that kept Namizu suspended. Nayako greeted Naruto, her unexpected arrival making his face turn pale. Naruto screamed, terrified beyond belief. Taniguchi withdrew the knife he had stabbed into the man who had been bullying him. The bully collapsed onto the floor, blood soaking his back. Instead of realizing his mistake and apologizing, the bully cursed at Taniguchi. The bully grabbed a glass in front of him and smashed it against Taniguchi's head. Unfortunately for him, Taniguchi's head was covered by a pumpkin mask, so the blow had little effect. The impact caused Taniguchi to lose his balance and he staggered, which the bully took advantage of to flee. The bully ran and shouted for help, hoping someone would assist him. He needed to get out of there quickly, so he reached into his pocket for his phone. But moments later, he cursed in frustration. He had left his phone in the dining room. Barefoot, the bully kept running, hoping to find someone who could help, at least call an ambulance or the police. He had already lost a lot of blood. In his desperation, he accidentally collided with someone. He felt a glimmer of hope. The bully immediately begged the person he bumped into to call the police or an ambulance. He also mentioned that he was being chased by a strange person. The man the bully collided with turned around, not believing the bully's words. The bully continued to urge him to quickly call the police or an ambulance because he didn't have much time. Slowly, the man fumbled with his phone and started calling someone. The bully grew impatient seeing how slowly the man moved to make the call. Finally, the man connected with someone, telling them his location and that the bully was in the park. Hearing the man's voice, the bully slumped in relief, thinking he was safe. Footsteps approached the bully, and he jerked up, turning when he heard someone's voice. The figure who slowly approached the bully said they wouldn't let him escape so easily. The bully was shocked beyond belief when he saw two figures wearing pumpkin masks, one holding a baseball bat wrapped in barbed wire and the other a knife. The figure holding the bat apologized for making their friend wait. The bully began to sweat in fear. What was happening? Nayako continued to pull the rope in her hand. Namizu squirmed and screamed, feeling like one side of her chest would tear away. Nayako then hooked the end of the rope she was holding to an iron fence, causing Namizu to hang there. Nayako said that Namizu's attitude was very bad. It was not right to force herself to be accepted by others. If only Namizu had been more cautious, all of this wouldn't have happened to her. While Nayako was focused on Namizu, Naruto slowly tried to escape. Unfortunately, Nayako knew that the man would try to run away. She quickly stopped Naruto's steps. A jerk like Naruto was the cause of all this. He had to take responsibility. Naruto do. Dijed claiming that Nayako had misunderstood. He said that he was just pulling a prank, not thinking that it would hurt Nayako. Naruto insisted that everything that happened was just a prank, nothing more. Upset, Nayako finally kicked Namizu's body, which wouldn't stop screaming. The kick knocked Namizu unconscious, and the girl even wet herself. Naruto, who had long waited for a moment to confront Nayako, steeled himself to not be afraid of her. Seeing that Nayako was still busy with Namizu, Naruto ran towards Nayako and was about to throw a punch at her. After all, Nayako was just a girl. Girls didn't have the strength of boys. Knowing Naruto's movements, Nayako quickly pulled out a knife and pointed it in front of her. Nayako's unpredictable movement surprised Naruto. He couldn't stop his attack, and in the end, his fist struck the knife that Nayako was holding. Naruto screamed in pain while holding his wrist. The palm of Naruto's hand split in two, and his thumb was also cut off. Naruto writhed on the path. Nayako then approached the man while carrying a brick. Nayako did not like hearing Naruto's screams. If Naruto thought that having a split hand was a terrible thing, then he was sorely mistaken. Nayako was going to smash Naruto's head with that brick. Without further thought, Nayako quickly swung the brick down onto Naruto's head. The impact made Naruto's head hit the path and he ended up unconscious. Nayako chuckled. This was what she called entertainment. After making sure Naruto was unconscious, Nayako threw the brick in her hand in any direction. Moments later, Naruto regained consciousness. Faintly, he heard a girl screaming for help. The girl was none other than Namizu. Namizu groaned. She couldn't feel one side of her chest. Hook was still embedded in her chest. Slowly, Naruto opened his eyes, shocked to see that his body was tied to a pole in a standing position. In front of him was Nayako, who was binding Namizu, who kept screaming. Namizu did not want to die. She begged Nayako not to kill her. Nayako covered Namizu's eyes with a cloth. The girl, unaware of where she was, tried to apologize to Nayako. Fully conscious now, Naruto yelled, asking what Nayako was doing. Hearing Naruto's voice, Namizu reacted immediately. She felt somewhat relieved that Naruto was there too. Nayako, having finished tying Namizu's hands, stepped away from the girl. Namizu slowly inched her body toward Naruto, her voice weakly pleading for help. Namizu kept crawling, and Naruto watched her with a cold sweat on his face. Not to mention the iron hook still attached to Namizu's chest. Naruto felt horrified at the sight. Namizu got closer. In his anxiety, Naruto accidentally noticed the wire from the iron hook on Namizu's chest connected to a pulley. Just realizing the existence of that pulley, Naruto's neck suddenly tightened. His face grew pale as he glanced through the corner of his eye and saw another pulley not far from where he was tied up. The wire choking Naruto's neck was connected to that pulley. There were pulleys linked by wires in the room. As Namizu moved closer to Naruto, the wire around Naruto's neck would tighten more. It was an execution. Meanwhile, Nayako pulled out her phone and started live streaming. The tension escalated. Namizu, frightened and unaware of the pulleys, kept moving toward Naruto, while the wire around Naruto's neck continued to tighten. Sweat and tears flooded both their faces. Nayako felt pleased. The scene before her was something filled with luxury. It was going to be an exciting live stream. Meanwhile, elsewhere in a restaurant, Arata and Kazuya sat waiting for Naruto's arrival. Arata picked up the burger he had ordered, grumbling because Naruto had not shown up yet. Naruto was supposed to meet them at Mickey D's in front of the station. Matsui began eating his burger with annoyance. However, Kazuya, who had been staring at his phone, said that Naruto wouldn't come. Arata looked confused at the young man in front of him. Kazuya sighed heavily, repeating that Naruto wouldn't come because he was currently live streaming with someone. Kazuya showed his phone to Arata. In the live stream, Naruto's face appeared, looking tormented with a wire around his neck. Kazuya knew that it was Nayako's doing. The girl had successfully captured Naruto. Seeing the live stream, food in Arata's mouth spewed out again. He was shocked to see Naruto's condition. Namizu was one step ahead of Naruto. Naruto's neck was being choked tighter, tears streamed down his face, and his eyes began to bulge. He could no longer stand and eventually fell to the ground. Fortunately, the bindings on the pole were not too tight. Saliva dripped from the corner of Naruto's mouth. Blood started to flow from the wire that was choking his neck. With his breath becoming more constricted, Naruto shouted for Namizu to stop approaching him. Unfortunately, Namizu did not heed Naruto's command. She continued to advance toward him until Naruto kicked her in the face. He cursed angrily, berating Namizu and telling her to stop coming closer. Namizu still didn't understand and wanted to keep approaching Naruto. Reluctantly, not wanting to die in vain, Naruto kicked Namizu in the face again. Nayako laughed joyfully while swinging the knife in her hand. The live streaming she was doing became a trending topic. Nayako mentioned that Naruto's grandmother was also watching the live stream. She hoped Naruto's family would enjoy the torment. Nayako urged Naruto to hold on a little longer. Naruto pleaded with Nayako to release him. Meanwhile, he was trying to free his hands from the bindings. Using his blood, he loosened the ties. Soon, Nayako approached, pointing her phone camera at Naruto's face and telling him to speak. Naruto gritted his teeth, just a little more and he would be free to fight back. Nayako pressed him to tell everyone what he had done. She promised to let him go once he finished his story. The stream was broadcasting worldwide, and Nayako welcomed Naruto to prime time. She instructed him to recount the events of that Halloween night and what he had done. At Mickey D's, where Arata and Kazuya were waiting for Naruto, they continued to monitor the live stream. Arata's face showed worry, fearing that Naruto would reveal their actions to Nayako from the previous day. Nayako had made up her mind to uncover the truth behind the events of that Halloween night. Kazuya had already guessed that the mastermind behind it was Naruto, who had intentionally placed firecrackers inside a pumpkin mask. Arata stared at Kazuya in astonishment. Just then, two girls sitting behind Arata shrieked. They were watching the live stream and saw their idol Naruto in the footage. They thought it was just a joke, but others were intrigued by what Nayako was saying. Which Halloween night were they talking about? A man not far from where Arata and Kazuya were sitting shouted out that he remembered an incident when he was in middle school. He had heard about a girl whose face was burned on Halloween, causing quite a commotion. People watching the live stream were reminded of the incident from the previous day. They increasingly suspected that the events of that Halloween were not an accident. Someone had placed firecrackers inside the pumpkin mask. Students sitting in the restaurant began gossiping about the Halloween incident. Many of them knew about it, and the female student who was the victim had to be taken to the hospital. They also knew that the victim's hair and face had been burned. It turned out that the mastermind behind the Halloween incident was Naruto. They all couldn't believe the fact. Arata's face turned pale with fear as he cursed angrily, wondering how it could be exposed like this. Kazuya took a deep breath and asked if Arata had known the truth all along. Did he know from the beginning that Naruto had placed the firecracker in the mask? Until now, Kazuya only thought it was just a prank, but it had spiraled out of control. Kazuya also questioned why no one had stopped Naruto. Arata remained silent, wondering whether Kazuya was on their side or Nyako's. Meanwhile, at the place where Naruto and Namizu were held captive, Nayako continued to point the camera at Naruto, pressuring him to confess to all his actions. If Naruto still refused to admit it, his fate would be the same as Namizu's. In the end, Naruto chose to confess. He did it to buy time for his bindings to loosen and to avoid making Naoko suspicious. He admitted that the events of that Halloween night were his doing, and he was the one who had placed the firecracker in the pumpkin mask. And it turned out that Naruto hadn't just put in a firecracker, he had also placed sulfuric acid in the mask. Everyone watching the live stream was stunned. They couldn't believe that Naruto could be so cruel. Kazuya ground his teeth, his emotions boiling over as he realized he knew nothing about what had happened on Halloween. Naruto's confession continued, revealing that he had taken sulfuric acid from the science lab and filled a polyethylene bag with the liquid. Sulfuric acid would not react with polyethylene, making the bag relatively safe to hold. So Naruto easily attached the bag containing the sulfuric acid to the pumpkin mask, ensuring that when Naoko used it, the bag would break. This way, the sulfuric acid would burn Naoko's entire face. Naruto laughed wickedly as he recounted it. People would no longer see Naoko's foolish face, which was why Naruto had planned it. Kazuya, listening to Naruto's confession, became very emotional. This was what Naoko had meant at that time. It wasn't the firecracker that had burned her face, but the sulfuric acid. The students in the restaurant began cursing angrily, furious at Naruto for having done something so cruel to Naoko. Arata glanced at the students. They were cursing Naruto, and everyone's faces looked very upset. This made Arata frightened, cold sweat pouring down he watched the enraged crowd. Then Kazuya stood up and grabbed Arata by the collar. Kazuya's face looked very emotional, staring sharply at Arata. Arata, suddenly being pulled like that, could only curse in annoyance, wondering what Kazuya wanted. Kazuya furrowed his brows, asking why Arata and Naruto could be so heartless to Naoko. There had to be a reason. Arata, initially silent, finally took a deep breath and released Kazuya's grip on his collar. He said that there was no special reason for him and Naruto to do that. They did it just for fun. Arata grinned as he adjusted his shirt. Kazuya, hearing that explanation, was completely baffled by the behavior of his friends. Naruto finished his confession. All the truths he had kept hidden were revealed, and now everyone knew about the crimes he had committed. Naruto had fulfilled Naoko's request, asking her to release him immediately. However, Naoko replied that it wouldn't be that easy to get away from her. Naruto's eyes widened in shock, wondering what else he could do to make Naoko let him go. He asked Naoko what he had to do for her to forgive him. Naruto continued to stall for time, feeling that the ties binding his hands were almost loose. He didn't care about Namizu, he just wanted to free himself. Naoko then grabbed Namizu by the hair, tilting her head back before stabbing her in the head with the knife she had been holding. Naruto gasped at Naoko's action. Namizu died instantly. Naruto's body shivered and he broke out in a cold sweat. Naoko pulled out the knife and carelessly threw Namizu's body aside. She then turned to the iron hook still embedded in Namizu's chest, preparing to pull it out. Naruto asked why Naoko killed Namizu when she had nothing to do with the oppression on Halloween night. Naoko didn't respond, which made Naruto furious. He cursed Naoko, calling her a psychopath and a cold-blooded killer. Naoko remained indifferent, ignoring Naruto's screams as she forcefully yanked the iron hook from Namizu's chest. She threw the hook onto a wooden beam, pulling it and wedging the end into the door. Naruto shouted in frustration, wondering what the girl was planning. If someone opened that door, Naruto's head would surely be severed from his body. He realized he could die at any moment. Naoko told Naruto to reflect on all his actions, for soon he would meet the ruler. She was curious whether Naruto would die quickly or slowly. Meanwhile, Arata and Kazuya ran anxiously towards the place where Naruto was held captive by Naoko. Kazuya followed Arata's lead, unable to believe that Naruto was really in the gym. Arata assured Kazuya that he knew exactly where the location shown in the live streaming was, as the gym was where they conducted their club activities. He urged Kazuya to quicken his pace, as the gym was right in front of them. Inside the gym, Naruto begged Naoko for forgiveness. He admitted that what he had done in the past was wrong. Naoko was not magnanimous enough to grant forgiveness. She had never given Naruto any mercy. Even when Naoko cried out in pain, Naruto and his friends had never shown any compassion. The harder Naoko cried, the happier Naruto became, and her suffering would only worsen. Everyone seemed like demons. However, Kazuya was different. He had never participated in bullying her. Only Kazuya refused to bully Naoko. Naruto was shocked to hear Kazuya's confession, so all this time Naoko and Kazuya had a connection. Naruto took advantage of this to bait Naoko. He chuckled and then burst out laughing. Naruto never expected his life to be filled with so many plot twists, and he certainly didn't think they would turn out like this. He told a lie, claiming that Kazuya was the one who started the bullying against Naoko. Naruto grinned, laughing wickedly for successfully playing with Naoko's emotions. Naoko denied Naruto's words, insisting that he was lying. She knew from the start that Naruto was the mastermind behind it all. Naruto's smile widened as he tried to convince Naoko, but she remained skeptical. Naoko moved closer to Naruto. The bait had worked. Quickly, Naruto seized Naoko's hand that was holding the knife, causing it to fall from her grip. Naoko was taken aback, but Naruto swiftly wrapped wire around her neck and then around her hand. At the same moment, the door was opened by Arata, and the wire tightened around Naoko's hand until it snapped. Naoko fell to the ground, clutching her hand. Naoko screamed in pain. Naruto smiled victoriously, having succeeded in subduing Naoko. Arata and Kazuya were astonished. Seeing Naoko's state, Kazuya screamed. Naoko's 3 fingers were broken, and she struggled to endure the pain in her hand. Arata stretched out his hand and slowly approached Naoko. He was out for revenge and intended to eliminate her. Naoko turned and smiled at Arata's arrival, which made him furious. He immediately kicked Naoko in the stomach. Arata's powerful kick made Naoko vomit. She clutched her. Numb belly. Not stopping there, Arata kicked the pumpkin mask Naoko was wearing, shattering it into pieces. The bandaged face of Naoko was finally exposed, and she groaned, blood pouring from her nose due to Arata's kick. Arata clenched his fist and pinned Naoko down, raining down punches on her face. He continued to punch Naoko until some of her teeth began to fall out. Arata kept cursing, just like Naruto, calling Naoko a cold-blooded killer and a crazy psychopath. Naruto, still tied to the pole, encouraged Arata to finish Naoko off. Watching Naoko being beaten like that made Kazuya unable to bear it. Once again, he stood by, silent while the girl was beat. Kazuya's body shook violently. Arata blindly pummeled Naoko's face. She didn't show any signs of resistance. The girl remained silent, glancing at Kazuya. When Naoko was always bullied, Kazuya just watched. Even when Naoko looked at him with pleading eyes, he still did nothing. Kazuya desperately wanted to help her, but he couldn't. He remained frozen, watching Naoko being oppressed. Even now, Kazuya didn't dare do anything while Arata was beating her. Naoko's eyes bulged as Arata strangled her. This made Kazuya jump in shock, his body sweating coldly as he watched Naoko struggling. Naoko's broken hand reached out for Arata. Naruto, witnessing Arata's enthusiasm, enjoyed seeing Naoko's tortured expression. He urged Arata to kill Naoko quickly. Naoko was a monster. She deserved to die. Kazuya's body finally moved. He grabbed a piece of the pumpkin and hurled it at Arata's back. Arata, who was choking Naoko, fell towards Naruto. Naoko, freed from Arata's grip, quickly stood up and coughed violently. Her breath was labored. Kazuya sighed with relief, finally able to move to help Naoko. Naoko held her aching neck, tears still streaming from the corners of her eyes. Kazuya even cried with emotion, no longer remaining silent while watching Naoko get beat. He approached Naoko, held her shoulders, and gazed intently at her face. Moments later, Kazuya embraced Naoko and told her that he loved her very much. Naoko felt relieved. Finally, Kazuya had said those words, although it was very late. She slowly closed her eyes. Kazuya kept calling her name until Naoko eventually fell unconscious in his arms. Meanwhile, Arata, having released Naruto, approached Kazuya and Naoko, each holding a baseball bat. Without hesitation, the two of them swung their baseball bats at Kazuya and Naoko. Naoko and Kazuya were unconscious. Arata and Naruto finally stopped beating the two of them. Arata snorted in frustration. He couldn't believe Naoko and Kazuya had a special relationship behind their backs. Naruto clicked his tongue, realizing this only now. A moment later, Arata asked in a panic what they should do now. They couldn't just leave Kazuya and Naoko in the gym. Naruto smiled, knowing exactly what they needed to do. He pulled out his phone and called someone for help. Meanwhile, at the police station, Matsui's superior announced that the investigation into the serial murders had been halted. Matsui, of course, was not happy with this news. The investigation couldn't just stop because the perpetrator was still roaming around. However, the superior claimed they already knew who the perpetrator was. What more did Matsui expect from the investigation? Matsui protested, stating that the case was more complicated than it seemed, and he needed to look into it further. The superior revealed that the serial killer was a teenager. What would Matsui do if the media found out about this? Hearing his superior's words left Matsui speechless, running out of excuses. Matsui's coworkers wondered what was really happening. According to rumors, there was a powerful figure who had ordered the investigation to be stopped. Matsui's coworkers didn't know who this person was, but it seemed that what Matsui was investigating was quite problematic. The girl disguised as Pumpkin Knight overheard her coworkers' gossip and felt concerned for Matsui. At the school, a police officer was seen patrolling the school building. The atmosphere at night in the school area was always eerie, and the officer couldn't stand being inside for too long. The pumpkin-masked killer was still at large, sending shivers down his spine. A moment later, the officer saw a car driving toward the school gate. He became suspicious. This was not the right time to be at school. The officer ran out of the school building to intercept the car. Fortunately, he arrived just in time at the gate, waving for the car to slow down. The car stopped, and the officer approached the window, instructing the owner to step out. As the car window slowly rolled down, the officer was shocked to see who was inside. He tensed up upon seeing the person's smile. It was a mayor named Tatsuo Kuroki, Naruto Kuroki's father. Nevertheless, the officer carried out his duty and asked what the mayor was doing there. Tatsuo told the officer to close his eyes and pretend he didn't see Mayor Tatsuo Kuroki coming to the school at such a late hour. The officer stammered, unsure of how to respond. Tatsuo reiterated that if the officer wanted to live in that city, he had to do as he said. Without any resistance, the officer finally agreed. He saluted as Tatsuo's car left the school gate. Naruto and Arata inside the car were amazed by Tatsuo's influence. The officer even continued to salute their car. No one could rival Tatsuo's honor, and Naruto was proud of his father. Arata also praised his friend's father, saying he was truly impressive. Tatsuo stated that it should be this way. Even demons couldn't oppose him, let alone a mere teenager. Naruto and Arata fell silent for a moment before praising Tatsuo again. Meanwhile, Nyako, Kazuya, and Namizu's bodies were lying in the trunk of the car. Kazuya had regained consciousness, but his mouth was taped shut, as were his arms and legs. Kazuya listened to the conversation between Arata, Naruto, and Tatsuo. Anyone who opposed the mayor wouldn't live to tell what happened. Everyone in that city surely knew this. After thinking for a while, Kazuya finally remembered who Tatsuo Kuroki was. Rumor had it that Tatsuo used local Yakuza and Russians to rule the world. Tatsuo was the ruler of the city. Naruto scrolled through his phone. The live streaming video of his confession had disappeared. Naruto and Arata were increasingly thrilled. The video related to their crime had truly vanished, somehow thanks to Tatsuo. Tatsuo claimed that the police and media had handled it, and Naruto was now safe. Naruto's eyes sparkled. His father was truly reliable and acted quickly. The car continued until they arrived at a construction site. The building was a new town hall set to open next year. Tatsuo brought them there to bury Namizu, Kazuya, and Nyako. Naruto hugged his father and repeatedly thanked him. Kazuya, overhearing this, was shocked, but there was little he could do. Tatsuo told Naruto to remove his arms because they were about to enter the construction site. What Tatsuo was doing now was just like what he had done when Naruto was in middle school. Back then, Nyako was his victim, but Tatsuo forced people to change their testimonies and put the girl in a mental hospital so that no one could see her. This fact left Kazuya stunned. Everything was exactly as Nyako had said. Tatsuo stated that Nyako should have been locked up in a mental hospital for life and never allowed to leave. Kazuya felt immense guilt for not knowing the truth. He looked at Nyako's body next to him, silently apologizing. Nyako shouldn't have had to suffer like that. The car finally stopped at a building where concrete would be poured tomorrow to create a foundation. This place would be filled to the brim, burying Kazuya, Nyako, and Namizu's bodies along with Tatsuo's tax records forever beneath the building. Tatsuo smirked. He was just as wicked as his son. Arata and Naruto lifted Namizu's body to the edge of a hole. On the count of 3, they both threw Namizu's body into the pit. A thud echoed. They couldn't tell how deep the hole was as they couldn't even see the bottom. Tatsuo then arrived and said that the hole was 20 meters deep. Arata and Naruto turned sharply, shocked to see Tatsuo transporting Kazuya and Nyako's bodies using a forklift. Tatsuo grinned from behind the wheel. The bottom of the hole was filled with iron bones to support the main pillars. Anything that fell in would never come back out. The hole would be filled with concrete tomorrow morning, and once the rest of the building was finished, all problems would be buried beneath it. In other words, the Kuroki family would be completely safe. Naruto raised an eyebrow, surprised that his father was so clever about these things. Even though he was used to his father's bad habits, Naruto was still taken aback. Tatsuo was always good at getting rid of anything that obstructed his path, and no one would know about what happened that night. Naruto and his father exchanged glances, smirking and then laughing wickedly, their faces looking truly demonic. Meanwhile, Kazuya, who had been conscious for a while, continued to observe his surroundings. Were he and Naoko really going to be killed by these people? Kazuya cursed angrily, unable to do anything with his body still bound. Amid Naruto and his father's happiness, Naoko suddenly regained consciousness. Everyone who heard Naoko's voice was startled. Naoko said that she would never forgive Naruto for what he had done to her all this time. Even if she had to crawl out of hell, Naoko would return and tear them all apart. Naoko swore to kill them all if she came back to life. Naoko was the unbeatable pumpkin knight, emerging from the darkness to kill the light. The fates of Naruto and Arata had been sealed. Naoko continued to utter her oaths. Arata and Naruto would feel the wrath of Pumpkin Knight because her anger was inhuman, no matter how many As Naoko would return, she would keep coming back until she won. Live in fear of the Pumpkin Knight, Naoko shouted loudly. The atmosphere that night instantly became chilling. They all felt an overwhelming terror. Arata and Naruto broke into a cold sweat, unsure what power Naoko had that intimidated them so much. Kazuya, lying next to Naoko, looked at her. She seemed incredible in his eyes. Tatsuo's emotions flared even more, and without wasting any more time, he drove the forklift to the edge of the hole and dumped Kazuya and Naoko's bodies in. Arata and Naruto gasped, watching Tatsuo do this. Naoko's screams echoed, gradually getting smaller and swallowed by the darkness. Naoko and Kazuya's bodies fell freely into the 20-meter-deep hole. Once they confirmed that Naoko and Kazuya had fallen, Arata and Naruto sighed in relief. Finally, Naoko, whom they often referred to as a monster, had disappeared. It was all over. There would be no more murder terror from Pumpkin Knight. No one could survive a fall from 20 meters, especially with only iron bones below. Before long, Naruto, Tatsuo, and Arata exited the construction building. The three of them walked in silence toward the car. However, Arata seemed to be unwell. The man was very stressed, having a very bad feeling. Naoko's words kept running through his mind. Should he take the girl's words seriously? Seeing his friend's odd demeanor, Naruto asked if Arata was okay. Arata held back from getting into the car. He scratched his head and said he was fine. But accidentally, Arata's eyes caught the silhouette of Pumpkin Knight standing on the roof of a building. Still haunted by Naoko's vow, Arata suddenly screamed loudly. Arata's face was very pale, and cold sweat flooded his body again. Naruto immediately ran when he heard Arata scream out the name Pumpkin Knight. Naruto was shocked to see his friend suddenly prostrating and repeatedly saying sorry. Arata admitted that he was a terrible person, and starting that day, he promised to live as a saint as long as Naoko didn't kill him. Arata continued to bow down, not daring to look up, his body trembling in fear. Naruto approached his friend and shook Arata's body, confused by his behavior. With tears streaming down and his voice trembling with fear, Arata pointed to the roof of the building where Pumpkin Knight was standing. Arata said that Naoko, the Pumpkin Knight, had truly returned. Naruto was taken aback, his eyes wide with shock as he turned to the direction Arata was pointing. But a moment later, Naruto's forehead furrowed. He found no sign of Pumpkin Knight where Arata had indicated. Arata then lifted his head. Indeed, the figure of Pumpkin Knight was not there. Naruto let out a breath, telling Arata to stay calm. Unbeknownst to them, the Pumpkin Knight that Arata had seen was indeed present. Pumpkin Knight was hiding and observing them with a sharp gaze. Arata apologized, seeming too tired to the point of hallucinating. The man took a deep breath to calm himself. Arata stood up again, holding his head. Perhaps it was because he was unaccustomed to seeing someone die before his eyes that he reacted this way. Naruto reassured his friend, saying everything would be okay because Kazuya and Naoko were far down at a depth of 20 meters. After hearing both of their words, Pumpkin Knight, who was hiding, immediately ran while carrying a knife. Meanwhile, deep in the hole, Kazuya opened his eyes. He stared at the night sky, which felt very distant. Moments later, Kazuya realized how he could have survived falling from such a height. When Kazuya moved, he felt something beneath him. Tilting his head, he saw Namizu's face in the dim light. Kazuya screamed. He had fallen onto Namizu's body, further damaging the girl. The tape that had wrapped around his mouth and bound Kazuya's feet had come loose, and he quickly stood up and moved away from Namizu's horribly mangled body. Kazuya felt lucky to have landed on Namizu's body. Perhaps that was why he survived. Kazuya looked around for Nayako, his body freezing in shock at the sight of the girl. Nayako's body was impaled on a metal pole. Kazuya's breath caught in his throat. He saw no movement from Nayako. Frustrated, Kazuya shouted, his voice echoing in the hole until Pumpkin Knight detected their presence. Kazuya kept calling out to Nayako, hoping she was still conscious. Shortly after Nayako coughed, her whole body felt so painful. Nayako felt she could not hold on much longer. She apologized to Kazuya, which left him feeling distraught. Nayako said that one day she would kill Arata, Naruto, and Tatsuo, and after that she wanted to go somewhere with Kazuya. They needed to wear nice clothes and have fun together. Nayako really wanted to go to the sea. She wanted to do all the things she had missed and would reclaim it all. Nayako thought it would be very easy. Tears streamed down Kazuya's face as he agreed to Nayako's invitation to go to the beach and have fun together. Nayako smiled up. On hearing this, her tears flowing too, and she began to hum softly. Silence fell. Kazuya no longer heard Nayako's voice. The girl no longer moved. Kazuya, who couldn't even embrace her because his hands were still tied, could only roar. His sobs broke out and echoed in the darkness. Shortly after, someone lowered a ladder and said that crying wouldn't bring Nayako back. Kazuya's roar abruptly stopped. He turned around to find the police officer who had been on duty with Matsui standing behind him. The policewoman had disguised herself as Pumpkin Knight again, just as she had done in the hospital. She was the figure Arata had seen earlier. The man who was hit by the bully turned out to be part of a gang of masked pumpkin-headed individuals. He took off his mask and put it on. Pumpkin Knight, holding a baseball bat, looked with concern at the bully's injuries, which appeared quite severe. Pumpkin Knight, wielding a knife, stated that the bully would soon die from blood loss. The bully asked who these people really were. Shortly after, Taniguchi arrived and said that the three were his friends. They shared targets with each other in a private chat room and were all manga fans who had been mocked by the bully. People like the bully, who enjoyed trampling others to lift themselves up, would never think that one day someone might fight back against them. Taniguchi and the three Pumpkin Knights knew what it felt like to be bullied by someone like him. The bully was sweating profusely, his body trembling as he realized that death was imminent. He deserved to die. Taniguchi and the three Pumpkin Knights raised their respective weapons and pointed them at the bully. The bully immediately knelt down and begged for forgiveness, admitting his wrongdoings and promising to make amends to Taniguchi. He would do anything Taniguchi wanted as long as he was allowed to live. All the Pumpkin Knights fell silent. However, moments later, Taniguchi swung a hammer at the bully's face, tearing his mouth open. Everything the bully had said was not enough to atone for his wrongs against Taniguchi. Inside the car, the police girl who saved Kazuya and Nayako drove with strong emotions. She was quite shocked to learn that Tatsuo Kuroki's son was involved in the case. From the beginning, the police girl was sure that something was happening. After changing out of her police uniform and taking the pumpkin mask from the evidence locker, all she did was wait. In the back seat, Kazuya looked very haggard, uninterested in the police girl's discussion. Meanwhile, the police girl kept rambling on about Tatsuo. Tatsuo always got his foolish son out of trouble. Knowing this, the police girl continued to keep an eye on the father and son. Her suspicion was correct. Tatsuo once again came to save Naruto. Tatsuo always covered up the crimes committed by his son, even if it meant killing someone and hiding that person's body. Kazuya's eyes stared sadly at Nayako, who lay in his lap. In a very faint voice, Kazuya asked why the police girl didn't arrest Tatsuo. Kazuya also realized that the police girl was driving far from the city. They wouldn't go to the police station because the police wouldn't do anything as long as they were under the mayor's control. After a long silence, the police girl finally explained her reasons. It turned out that her father had been killed by Tatsuo. At that time, the police girl's father was running for mayor and had promised to eradicate the rampant corruption in their city government. His image was so good, and he had such strong support that the voters made it clear that the police girl's father would win the election. However, suddenly, her father disappeared just before the election and lost. 3 days later, the police girl's father was found dead in the canal. Without conducting an investigation, the police decided that her father had died from the pressures of the election and had ultimately chosen to commit suicide. But the police girl knew that her father would never commit suicide. He was not that kind of person. Listening in silence, Kazuya concluded that Tatsuo had stopped the competition by killing the police girl's father. The police girl then decided to become a police officer to fight against corruption like her father did. However, she couldn't investigate while Tatsuo still held control over the government. Even if she were lucky enough to catch him, she would lose the respect of her colleagues. All this time, she had been waiting for someone like Kazuya, one of Tatsuo's victims, to appear. Someone like Kazuya who was willing to help her avenge her father. The girl was waiting for Kazuya. Kazuya's face looked very frightening. The police girl even screamed and suddenly stopped the car. Her breath was heavy, cold sweat soaked her face. For some reason, when she saw Kazuya earlier, she felt extremely scared. Kazuya was behaving differently from before. He looked like he was no longer Kazuya. Kazuya stuck out his tongue, laughed, and said that he would help the police girl kill Tatsuo and the others. The police girl felt an overwhelming terror. Kazuya's aura was clearly different. Pumpkin Night had truly returned. Not long after that incident, Halloween finally arrived. Various models of pumpkin masks, which are a hallmark of Halloween, lined the stores, and there were also pumpkins used as candy holders. The streets were decorated with pumpkin balloons. Although the streets were very crowded, Arata, who was in the middle of the crowd, felt scared. Even when a little child asked his mother to buy a pumpkin mask, Arata saw it as Nayako. Nayako's oath echoed in Arata's mind, making him terrified. Cold sweat flooded Arata's body, and a moment later, he screamed loudly, drawing the attention of the people around.